I'm here with E. Michael Jones. Mr. Jones, how you doing?
Good.
It's good. I'm happy to have you on. I've been a big fan of your work since I found out about you when you went on Pete Quinones' show to talk about the Weimar Republic. That was a very entertaining episode.
Okay, good.
Well, what I'm having you on for is I do a series called Explain to Me Like I'm Five, where I have a guest on to kind of just go through the basics of a topic. And since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, it seems to me, at least with my generation, Gen Z, we're a lot more open to questioning the narrative of Jewish involvement in things. I don't know if you've ever seen TikTok or not, but there are lots of Gen Z people on TikTok. Whenever any bad legal thing happens, they want the last name of the judge. They're always trying to figure out where the Jews are involved in the scenario. We're much more open to questioning the narrative we've been given. So I figured I'd have you on to kind of just give a basic rundown of the Jewish question and how do you explain to people and kind of just educate some younger listeners on the Jewish question. So when someone's curious about it or you're explaining it, what time period do you begin with and how do you go about explaining it?
Well, I wrote the book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, in order to deal with the Jewish question. Because recently, let's say in the late 19th century, it's been confused as a racial issue. That's how Hitler took it. That's the word anti-Semite or anti-Semitism means the Jews have bad DNA. It's a form of biological determinism that basically contradicts the traditional narrative. The traditional narrative was always theological. And so I went back to the time of the crucifixion, when the Jews had to either accept Christ as the Messiah or reject him. And I defined the Jew as the rejecter of Logos. Logos being rationality. The Logos incarnate is known as Jesus Christ. God is Logos. Logos is God. That's what St. John said at the beginning of his gospel. And what the Jewish identity is bound up with rejection of everything that is associated with that term. Including the most basic idea, which is speech or dialogue. We have reached a point now in American culture where the Congress is edging toward banning any criticism of Jews. This is because the Jews simply have run out of arguments. They've lost control of the narrative. People are not buying what they're saying. And so they've decided to resort to the last resort, which is basically ban anyone that they disagree with. That's what's going on right now.
That is an interesting part about how it's always kind of painted as a racial question, as a biological determinist question. Any conversation I have today with people my age and Gen Z groups about race or culture, they always come back with, well, I can't imagine judging someone for the color of their skin. It's like, what does skin color have to do with it? I'm talking about cultures. I'm talking about heritage. I'm talking about why is it that some cultures succeed and some cultures fail? What is the overlying effect of these cultures? And what is specific about Jewish culture that causes them to get into these positions of power and to do the things they do, and like they did in the Weimar Republic, or like they did in Germany with porn production, or the German Institute of Sexology in Weimar. Like, what is it about Jews, you're saying, specifically that causes them to want to seek this out? Is it just the rejection of logos, or is there self-preservation involved? Like, why are they trying to do this?
It's rejection of logos. Rejection of logos means the order of the universe, which means the moral order of the universe. They don't believe in it. They reject it. And what we now have, after the Jews have taken control of our political process, we have reached the point where the Jews are now creating a scenario in which they are above the law because they're Jewish. That is the scenario. That's the grammar, not so hidden grammar of what is happening in Gaza right now. It also can be seen in the Jewish reaction to overturning Roe versus Wade. For almost 50 years, Roe versus Wade was justified on various grounds, but it was never specifically related to the Jews, even though the Jews were behind it. It was a Jewish creation. It was creation of two Jews in New York City, pretty much Bernard Nathanson and Lawrence Lader. But whenever they were described in public, they were always described as Nathanson was a gynecologist. No affiliation. His opponents were always described as Catholics. So they portrayed it as an issue where Catholics were trying to impose their views on everyone else. Well, after the overturn of Roe versus Wade, it turns out the exact opposite was the case. the Jews announced at this point that abortion is a fundamental Jewish value. Well, of course that is. I've said it's a sacrament. They don't use words like that, but I said basically that it is what it is. And just recently in Indiana, the appeals court accepted that argument. So the court gave the Jews an exemption from Indiana's strict abortion law because they're Jewish. What does this mean? This means the Jew can kill someone and not be held responsible. At the same time this is going through the courts, we have exactly the same thing happening in Gaza, where the Jews are allowed to kill innocent women and children simply because they're Jews and they have Jewish privilege. And they control the Congress, they control the media, and so no one in a position of authority is objecting to what is the most serious takeover of discourse in my lifetime.
Now, I can't remember who. I think it was Carl Smith who to know who has power, see who defines the exception. And it seems like every exception to any norm or rule we have in this culture is always the Jews. They're always the exception, which kind of points to the fact that they tend to be the ones in power.
Right.
So when you're going about explaining the how they got into this position, when do you start? Like, do you start explaining like World War II was the Bolsheviks? Do you start explaining in America when they first came across the border, or when they first came into America and started setting up shop? Like, when someone wants to understand the Jewish question and Jewish involvement, when's the time period they should start studying?
Well, it begins at the crucifixion of Christ. Because that's when Jews chose their identity as rejection of Logos. This was the Jewish people. Jews are always claiming that they didn't kill Christ, when it's so obvious from the gospel that they were the ones who pushed Pilate into doing it. Without them, Pilate would have let Jesus go. And so they were the ones who were behind it. They solemnly, I'm talking about the Jewish people. At this point, you have to make a distinction between the Jews and all Jews. The Jews are the Jewish people. That's what that means. The Jewish people, St. Paul said the Jewish people are the Jews are the people that killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. They killed Christ as a people. This was an official pronouncement of their government. It was called the Sanhedrin. It didn't have total hegemony. It couldn't levy the death penalty because they were conquered by Rome. But this was the government of the Jewish people. And that government decreed that Christ would die. And the Jewish people ratified that when in front of Pilate, and when they said, his blood be on us and our children. That was a solemn ratification made by the entire people. Now, when I say the entire people, I do not mean every Jew. We have to clearly make this distinction. As I said many times, the Blessed Mother was Jewish, and she did not call out, crucify him, when Christ was on the cross or when he was being led there. St. John, the beloved disciple, he was there too. He was Jewish, and he did not call out, crucify him. We have to make this distinction, because otherwise nobody can understand what's going on. So the Jews is not the same as all Jews. That's simple.
Yeah, whenever I've been pushed on this, I've always explained it as the weird Jews converted. All the good ones ended up converting. Now there's just the Jews that are left. St. John, Mary, they've all became Christian. They all continued with walking with Christ. And then you have the ones who rejected them. I always take it back to when they chose Barabbas, when they chose a spiritual Messiah. Sorry, they chose a physical Messiah over the spiritual Messiah. That was when they kind of made their vow to reject Logos.
Right. It was part of the same drama. Part of the same drama. Barabbas was a revolutionary. And when they chose Barabbas and rejected Logos, they became revolutionaries. And that's what they've been ever since. And so the Jewish revolutionary spirit begins with the crucifixion. It goes all the way up to the present. 2,000 years of history of how they have remained. This has been the constant source of their identity from then up till now. They've always been involved in revolutionary movements. A rabbi said this. Louis Israel wrote a book in which he said something like the Jews' participation in reform movements. Well, by reform movements, he means revolutionary movements. He said there hasn't been a revolutionary movement in Europe that hasn't been promoted by Jews. And he's right. I'm just quoting the Jew, and I'm expanding that in the detail that he did not expand it on.
When it comes to the Jewish revolutionary spirits, I haven't fully admit I haven't read it yet. Several of your books are on like the cart on Coats Awards magazine. I just haven't got the time to order them yet. Looking forward to reading them though. When it comes to the Jewish revolutionary spirit, what's a great example? Like if someone says, "Give me an example," what's a go-to example you'd like to point to a heavy Jewish involvement in a revolution?
How about Trotsky? Trotsky and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. It's called the Russian Revolution, but that's because it took place in Russia. The people who were the leading force behind that revolution were all Jews. The Bolsheviks were overwhelmingly Jews. Even the Social Democrats, who were the opposite, they were the Mensheviks, they were Jews as well. So it was dominant. It was a Jewish revolutionary spirit from its inception. It could not have succeeded without Jewish participation. So it began in the 19th century. During that period of time, the Okhrana, or the secret police in Russia, kept trying to deal with it, kept trying to stop it, and they found that it was impossible to penetrate the shtetl. The shtetl is where Jews lived at that point. It's called the Pale of the Settlement. All of these villages along what was then the western border of Russia, the Jewish revolutionaries would simply disappear into those little villages, and no one could find them. So Jewish participation was Jewish collaboration was absolutely essential. And so they eventually succeeded in bringing dynamite in from the West. They were on the western border. They imported Marxism, terrorism. The first use of dynamite in Russia was by Narodnaya Volia, which was the national will, which was basically a Jewish terrorist group. They had started out with a group called Cherny Peredel, which is the Black Path, as an education, a form of education. But the peasants, the Russian peasants, they tried to educate, wouldn't listen to them. As soon as the Jew would show up, he was obvious that he was an alien in those villages. They'd report him to the police, and he got nowhere. So at that point, they turned to terrorism, and they started using dynamite for the first time in Russia by blowing up the railroad tracks that the Tsar's train was on. Eventually, they succeeded, and they killed the Tsar in 1881. And as a result, there was a reaction among the Russian people, and the Jews started to leave in large numbers, and they came over here to the United States. This was also the beginning of the Holocaust narrative. What you had here at this point in history was one of the most primitive hygienic situations in Europe, namely in the shtetl in the in Russia, right near one of the most advanced hygienic situations in the world, which was Germany. Koch's postulates were all created in Germany. Koch was a German. These were used to fight disease, and they had certain methods for doing it. So this story came out in 1910. It's in my book, The Holocaust Narrative. If you want the details, you can find the details there. But woman who's on the train, she's a Jew, she's coming from Russia, she reaches the German border, and immediately everybody gets off the train. They're taken into a large room. The women are separated from the men. They have to take their clothes off. This is a shock to the Jewish sensibilities. Of course, no one has ever done this before. Then they bring the women and the men into separate shower rooms. They have never seen plumbing before. They don't know what's going to happen. So at this point, they're subjected to showers. Their heads are shaved because they carry lice. And lice are a carrier of typhus. And typhus is endemic with this group of people. It's so endemic, it's been with them for so long that they are immune to it. They're all like typhoid Mary. They carry the disease and they do not manifest symptoms of it. So you just have to treat people like this. The clothes are then fumigated with a gas, Zyklon B, and then they dry them off, put their clothes back on, put them on the train, and they send them over to Ellis Island, where they start to populate New York City. Now that situation remained all the way up to World War II. The same thing happened with immigrants. There's a memoir by Irmgard Rimland, who was the wife of Ernst Zundel, who had a famous role to play in the Holocaust narrative with the trials in Canada. She was subjected to exactly the same thing as a German retreating with the German army back as the Soviet army pursued them. As soon as they crossed the border into Germany, she was subjected to the same treatment. She was a German. She wasn't a Jew. Kurt Vonnegut, who was a pilot in World War II, was captured by the Germans. He was subjected to the same thing. He was terrified, and he had been knew what a shower was. He had taken showers as an American. The Jews were terrified, and so the story began to mutate, and it eventually became the founding myth of the Holocaust narrative.
That is interesting. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. One thing I find very interesting is that in America, it's even harder to. I find with the older millennials and boomers generations, almost impossible to, specifically with Protestants, to bring up any doubt or question of the Jewish narrative or even broach the Jewish question because of the really warped Protestant theology regarding Jews in Israel. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any takes on that, or like where that come from? Because I have no idea where that really
came from the Scofield Bible. There was a scoundrel by the name of Scofield who wrote notes to the Bible, and no one of it would have ever known about them until Louis Untermeyer, who was a Jewish publisher and influential figure in New York, got the Oxford University Press to publish the Bible with Scofield's notes to it. And Scofield's notes were the antithesis of the Catholic understanding of the Jewish question, which you articulated at the beginning. In other words, the Catholic position is that the Catholic Church is the new covenant, it's the new Israel, and Catholics are now the children of Moses. Jesus Christ disinherits the Jews in chapter 7 of St. John's Gospel, where he gets into a disputation, and they say, we are the sperm of Abraham. And then they say, we are this is a genetic, this is Jewish racism. We have special DNA. And then they say, we are the children of Moses. And Jesus said, no, if you were children of Moses, you would rejoice to see me as your Messiah. But your father is Satan. I once gave a talk in Prague where I quoted the gospel, and the next day, the headline in the papers was, Jones said Jews are children of Satan. No, I didn't say that. St. John said that. I don't want to be accused of plagiarism here, but obviously it still has a kind of shocking effect, but it's a pillar of the Christian message. So what happened? What did Scofield do? He turned it around, completely obliterated any sense of the church as the new Israel, and then restored Israel, the synagogue of Satan, the Jews who rejected Christ, as the true Israel, as if Christ had never come. And so so then they ransack the Bible. This is what the Zionists do, Christian Zionists do. And they come up with their version of the story of Exodus and Numbers, where the Jews basically take over Canaan at God's command. The Hebrews take over Canaan at God's command. And they say that is still valid. And the Israelis are now doing exactly what Joshua did at that time. This is theologically preposterous. Okay. This is not what the Bible says. You have to eliminate the entire New Testament, pretend that it doesn't exist in order to claim that the Bible says this. It is biologically preposterous because the Jews, the Ashkenazi, are not Semitic. They have no biological connection to the Hebrews who left Egypt. They are a Turkic race that comes from the North Shore of the Black Sea. So
are
these
the Kazarians or the Khazars? The Khazars.
Yes.
What is this?
Yes. Well, it's the Khazars.
Khazars.
Arthur Kessler wrote a book about this, but it's also been confirmed by the Genome Project. There was there was an article in National Geographic that talked about the Ashkenazi DNA as being Turkic and not Semitic.
Genome Project. Okay. Yeah, that's one thing that is this. I didn't know it came from the Scofield Bible note. That's very interesting. I would say the complete lack of covenants in Protestant theology, almost like there's either a drastic misunderstanding of old and new covenants, or a complete lack of covenants, almost, that leads to not just a misunderstanding of Jews and the potential for Protestant Zionism, but it really does just affect an overall worldview of how they act in the world. I would say covenants are up there, probably one of the most important things in the Bible. And it's just the complete misunderstanding of that has been brought about by the Scofield Bible, and the Jewish version has been just a disaster for American Protestantism.
Well, it goes back way before Schofield too.
Hmm.
I mean, when the Puritans came over to America, the Puritans were Judaizers. They were revolutionaries. They had overthrown the king. John Milton is the great Puritan poet. He wrote Paradise Lost. He was the third man to sign the king's death warrant. So these were regicides. These were revolutionaries. And at a certain point, England decided, we can't stand these people anymore. Please leave. And so they did. A lot of them went to New England. Okay. And when they got here, they had two things. Okay. They had the Bible, according to their Calvinist understanding of it, and they had the woods. And that's it. And we got to come up with some type of modus vivendi here. We have to have some type of explanation for what we're doing. We don't have custom. We don't have law. We don't have anything. So what are we going to base it on? And they took the covenant as the basic idea of Puritanism. This was the covenant. It's called covenant theology. They said, God has made a covenant with us. We are the Hebrews. We are the new Hebrews. And this is Canaan. And we were sent by God here to displace the natives. Everything they did was based on their understanding of the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah. I'm curious. Have you ever read any of Hilaire Belloc on his book on the Jews? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
What are your thoughts on it? Because I was reading it today, and it's pretty interesting. I just want to know what are your thoughts on it.
It's a very mild statement of the crisis that everyone was faced with in Europe in the 1920s. Basically what happened is that the empires, the World War I had destroyed all of these empires, and now you have these crazy republics that are springing up all over, especially in Germany. The Soviet Republic of Bavaria. Bavaria is a Catholic state in Germany. It was now run by Russian Jews. This is what Pius XII, he was Nuncio Eugenio Pacelli, went to the Wittelsbach Palace. He said, wrote a report about what he saw. He said, it's all Russian Jews. There are no Germans here, and there are slutty women and hanging around and so on and so forth. That was used as evidence of his anti-Semitism by Jonah. What was the guy's name? The guy, I forget his name. Anyway, he was a kind of the dance craze of a while back. Anyway, he wrote a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners. He deliberately mistranslated that passage, and based on his mistranslation, he tried to claim that it was that Pius XII was an anti-Semite. Everyone knew this at the time. Everyone knew that because of the Russian Revolution, there were Jewish revolutionaries spreading throughout all of Europe. Winston Churchill said it, and Belloc wrote a book about it because it was on everyone's mind, and he's been called an anti-Semite ever since. He said at one point, every time you call a Jewish criminal a Jew, you're called an anti-Semite. Well, he's proof of that. That has been used to blacken his name to this day.
Which is a real shame, because he had some fantastic books. The Great Heresies, for example, with his entire chapter against Puritanism. It's just one of my favorite things in the English language. It's an incredible chapter. So one of the things that, at least with Gen Z, that seems very common is just the complete recognition that Jews run porn. And I don't think anyone my age actually objects to that. It's just like we all recognize and say, yeah, pornography and this Jews run pornography and they push pornography.
Right.
Why do you think that is? Like, I know, but for the audience, why does that?
Because it's a form of control. Because it weakens the population. It weakens everyone. It destroys marriage. It weakens the dominant culture and makes the goyim easier to control. It's that simple. Why there is a rabbi now by the name of Solomon Friedman who is the owner of Pornhub. Okay, we don't have to say anything more than that. It's not a coincidence that this man is a rabbi, because this is another Jewish sacrament, like abortion. Abortion is the Jewish sacrament of initiation for women. Pornography is the Jewish sacrament of initiation for men. And it's no coincidence that a rabbi owns Pornhub. Now, the Washington Post just did an article on this guy. It's called what they call a puff piece. Okay. This is the opposite of assassinating your character. This is creating a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And they're going out of their way to be completely sympathetic to this guy and try to give him every benefit of the doubt when everybody knows this is predatory behavior that was not tolerated when the Christians, both the Catholics and the Protestants, had control of American culture. It is only after the Jews took control that articles like this would be published. But so we're supposed to think, because this article appeared in the Washington Post, that this man that pornography has some type of credibility, or that it's harmless, or no. What happens when you do this is you destroy any credibility that the Jewish religion may have. This is not this is not what they say it is. If the Jews worshipped Yahweh, they would not be promoting abortion and pornography. The fact that they are promoting abortion and pornography means that they worship Moloch. And it's not clear to me why we should recognize Moloch worship as an accepted religion here. Why is the Catholic Church engaging in dialogue with people like this? Do they engage in dialogue with Satanists? No. So why are they engaging in dialogue with Jews, with the synagogue of Satan?
There's that great quote from Solomon where it's the only argument you owe a blasphemer was your sword through his gut. Which I think is a fantastic quote for today's age. Obviously, listeners, I'm not calling for violence. Gotta specify this because this goes up on YouTube. We gotta specify that. When it comes to the Jewish religion, Judaism, how much of it actually goes back to the Jews of the time of Christ? Like the Talmud, the Judaism, the temple, like how much of it actually can be traced back? How much of it is a reinvention? Like what is the history here of modern Judaism to 2,000 years ago Judaism? Is there any connection?
Okay.
How does it go about?
Right. The crucial event happened in 70 AD when Christ's prophecy was fulfilled. In other words, the Jews chose to be revolutionaries. They rose up in 70 AD against the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire crushed them. It conquered Jerusalem, and at that point, it destroyed the temple. Now, once the temple is destroyed, the Jews have no priesthood, they have no sacrifice, and they have no temple. They cannot fulfill the requirements of the Mosaic covenant, and their religion is gone. It's over. It disappeared. It ended. And it was replaced by the new covenant. Jesus Christ is the high priest. We have a priesthood. His body is the temple. We have a priesthood, and we have the sacrifice of the Mass, which replaced everything that the Jews had at that point. At this point, the Jews, the Jew wasn't enough. The Jewish revolutionary spirit still rose its head 60 years later with the rebellion of Simon Bar Kokhba in 135. And at that point, they were crushed again. Jerusalem was erased from the map, and the Jews were dispersed throughout the world. They're called the diaspora. Okay. At this point, they started to regroup. And eventually, about 300 years later, they came up with the codification of the new religion, which is called the Talmud. There were two Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud. They both came in from the period of roughly 300 AD to 500 AD, which means that the Jewish religion is younger than Christianity. The Jewish religion that preceded Christianity ended. It's over. It's extinct. They cannot fulfill that covenant. And they have been trying to come up with a substitute ever since, and that substitute has been the Talmud. Now, over this period of time, the Jews made a big comeback, largely because of the United States of America and the role that they played in World War II and the Holocaust narrative. And now the Jews have incredible political power. They control our political process, and they are now planning, as far as I can tell, to rebuild the temple. They tried this once before under Julian the Apostate in the middle of the 4th century, and it failed miserably. The reason they're doing it now is because there's this specter that is haunting the Jewish mind, which is that no Jewish kingdom has lasted longer than 80 years. And I think now we're seeing the final days of Israel, the state of Israel, as another Jewish kingdom that's going to cease to exist.
When it comes to the Jewish question and Jewish problem, what are some solutions? Like, how do you go about raising awareness? I know you do podcasts and stuff, but like, if someone's listening to this podcast and they go, I want to talk to people about this and kind of, raise awareness, how does someone broach the conversation? What's an example they can point to? How do they go about, making this more of a common view, a normalized view?
Well, first of all, you have to talk about it. Everything begins with consciousness. If you don't know, you can't act. And so what we're having is a discussion. We're succeeding. After the attempt to ban all these discussions, we are succeeding in continuing this discussion in spite of all the Jewish efforts to stop it. And it's having an effect on the Jews. The genocide in Gaza is having an effect on the Jews. The director who won the Academy Award for Zone of Interest stood up and said, I refute my Jewishness. It's become so burdensome and so loathsome to them that they want to get rid of it. So how do they do it? And I said in a tweet, I said that there are two options now for the Jews. There is Masada, which is what happened after the destruction of the temple. The Jewish troops holed up on a mountaintop called Masada, and they all committed suicide. That's what's going to happen if they continue this policy in Israel right now. They are going to destroy themselves physically. I said the other option is baptism. And this is a better option because you destroy Jewishness by destroying the rejection of Logos. You reject the rejection of Logos. At that point, you have destroyed the Jew because the Jew is only a rejecter of Logos. At that point, you also open yourself up to the Logos, and the necessary step then is to get baptized, at which point you have fulfilled the necessary but not sufficient condition for attaining salvation. So I said that goes out over the internet, and then I'm on a boat heading across the Adriatic, and someone hands me a cell phone, and there's Gilad Atzmon, the famous Israeli saxophone player, and he tweets, there are only two options, Masada and I'm thinking, oh, Gilad got my memo. Masada and then he says the Samson option. Well, the Samson option is basically going to drag everybody else down with us. And basically, there are two versions of the same thing. So I immediately recorded a little conversation, sent it off to Gilad, whom I met in London. I admire this man. He's a self-hating Jew, but that's not the final stage. I think he could be a logos promoting Christian. And I said, no, you got it wrong. It's Masada or baptism. And then that got back and forth, and the lady who sent it to him got a tweet from him, said, I understand that. He said, thanks, E. Michael Jones. I love that guy. Well, thank you, Gilad. But I'm your friend. You're right. I am your friend. And I don't want you to kill yourself, okay? I want you to open your life up to eternal life. I want you to exterminate the Jew within you, which means liberate the person who is imprisoned by the Jew, by your Jewishness. This is exactly what that director was saying. The Hollywood director was saying. He in his inchoate way, I refute my Jewishness. Yes, refute your Jewishness, because your Jewishness has alienated the entire human race. That's not an exception. That's not an exaggeration. The entire human race. Just check out any of the recent United Nations resolutions, and you realize the entire world is opposed to the United States and Israel. and 2 other countries, Nauru and Micronesia. That's it. Our government, because they are being bribed by IPAC to basically follow this genocidal policy, has alienated Americans from the entire human race. I didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for my permission to do this. They have hijacked my government. They have hijacked my country and made us proxy warriors for Israel. And I don't like it. And all right, let me go one step further. Lots of people don't like it. And what you're going to see at this point is that consciousness is eventually going to find some type of expression in the political process. That's what's got to happen. Is we need the formation of an anti-Jewish political party. Now that sounds really bad. I mean, we're all screaming, running from the room as we said that, but there is precedent in American history. If you look at the anti-Masonic party, it's exactly the same thing. Why was there an anti-Masonic party? Because the American people felt that the Freemasons were controlling the government secretly from behind the scenes. That's exactly the situation with the Jews right now. And we need some type of political expression of that reality.
It's honestly, that's very similar to what someone like Nick Fuentes is trying to do with America First. What are your thoughts on Nick Fuentes? He seems to be one of the guys was kind of popularizing the idea of questioning the Jewish narrative. What are your thoughts on Nick Fuentes? And
he's obviously a very charismatic figure. He's got a large following. I don't. Sometimes the tail wags the dog, but some. I just. I'm glad. I'm amazed that someone this young can have this type of effect on the political process. But that doesn't change the fact that you're still kind of young and you could still benefit from people who have more experience and who have written books on the matter. That's part of the problem here. That's part of the problem. You need, it's not enough just to have a political movement. The political movement has to have some type of intellectual depth. And that's why I wrote The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, because that provides the depth for a critique that no one is going to be able to refute. Believe me, the book has been out for 13 years now. If the Jews could have refuted it, they would have. If they could have stopped people from reading it, they would have, and they can't. They didn't, and they can't. So you can trust this book. Believe me. Believe me. If there were flaws in it, you would have heard about it. Okay. The ADL would have been all over that case. The ADL has billions of dollars. They have thousands of people. They can pore over every single word in that book, and they haven't come up with one statement that is able to refute anything in that book. That's why they have to ban discussions like this.
No, I really do like your point. Like the solution to ending the ending of Judaism isn't obviously not eradication, but it's conversion. I think that was one of the points I really like from Belloc's book was like there's 3 options: there's segregation, eradication, and conversion. You can either assimilate them into the culture, which is through conversion, segregate them out of the culture, or eradicate them. 2 of those options are not so great morally. One of those options is what we're supposed to do anyway. And so I really like the idea of the solution really being to say we should really be trying to convert these people because they are rejecting logos, and that's just not good for their souls or anybody's soul.
No, it's not good for them either. Let's be honest here. I'm going back to the conversation between Ben Shapiro and Bishop Barron. You can find it on the internet. Ben Shapiro basically says to the bishop, am I going to hell? Well, that's a good question because it's an important question. And he deserves an answer. And so I'm going to tell you what Bishop Barron should have said, because it's a serious question. It's on Ben's mind. He should have said, are you baptized? And at that point, Ben would say no. And then Bishop Barron should have said, if you refuse to be baptized, you cannot be saved. You will spend eternity in fire, in flames. That's a long time. Okay. And that's what he should have said. And he didn't say it. He did not proclaim the gospel. And so he will now be responsible for Ben Shapiro's damnation. That's not a position I want to be in. I don't ever want to be in a position like that. I want to propose the best thing I know for the Jews who are making life miserable for everyone around the world. Okay. They are hated by everyone, and they deserve to be hated. Let's be honest. Their behavior in Gaza is hateful behavior. Their promotion of abortion and pornography and all transgenderism, gay marriage, you name it, they deserve to be hated. And they can never examine their own consciences and say, well, maybe we're doing something wrong. No, as soon as they feel this, they say, oh, it's anti-Semitism. We're victims once again of anti-Semitism. And you've got organizations like the ADL, which thrives on promoting this hatred of Jews. They love it. They love it when people hate Jews, because then they can ask for more money and create more hatred for Jews.
No, I would say that that craving victimhood, craving the idea of being victimized so you can claim victimhood status is just it's infected everything. I mean, I know so many gay people who want their parents to not approve of their homosexual lifestyle, this way they can claim victimhood status and claim trauma. It's like my generation, the liberals on the lefties and trannies and stuff on my side, the younger generation, they seek out opportunities to be victims and opportunities for trauma, so they can use that as justification to get away with things. Very similar to how the Jews do it. It's kind of infected that entire culture. Victimhood culture is heavily Jewish culture.
Yeah, you can delegate. They can delegate Jewish privilege. And you can have black privilege if you toe the line with their narrative. You can have homosexual privilege and so on and so forth. There's a dynamic here that's very important. The life of Michel Foucault, who became the philosopher of the woke university during the 1990s. He was teaching at Berkeley. He was a homosexual. Okay. And when he got to San Francisco in the 70s, this was unheard of stuff that he had never experienced in France. And he succumbed to it. Now, he hated his culture because his culture would not punish him for being a homosexual. He felt that he deserved to be punished. He wanted to be punished, and the culture wouldn't do it. So what did he do? He went to the bathhouses where they put him in a dungeon and torture him. That's what he could do anything he wanted, but he wanted to be punished. He wrote a book about that. Okay. We are doing the homosexuals no favors by allowing this type, by celebrating this type of behavior, especially during this month.
We are called as Christians to love our neighbors, and love is willing to good for the other. And letting someone continue in their disgusting lifestyle is not loving. The biggest problem I see in America is Protestantism and modern American Christianity is we confuse love for non-confrontation. And it's like, no, sometimes loving someone means being confrontational and saying, hey, what you're doing isn't good for you or anybody else, and you should knock it off. That's
right. That's real love, because real love has to be determined by the truth. And the truth says that this is not healthy behavior. It's not, you're just destroying yourself. So you need to stop. I'm not going to celebrate your self-destructive mania. That's what a sane culture would do, but we have the exact opposite, and this month is proof of it. And so the conclusion we have to draw is basically that the people who control the culture hate homosexuals, and they want to see them die. That's the only conclusion that we can draw from what's going on now.
Yeah. Okay, I have two more questions, and then we'll probably wrap it up. Have you heard of a guy called Dr. Umar? Have you heard of him at all? Dr. Umar.
I'm drawing a blank here.
Okay, that's fine. He's well, the reason I bring him up is that he is one of these black liberation types, like very much a Malcolm X type for the black community. And he's very quick to name the Jews and specifically point out European Jews who run the music industry and control all hip hop and music artists and stuff. And so there seems to be, even amongst the African Americans, a waking up to. Kanye was a good example, I think, of this. They're kind of waking up to the Jewish effects on their culture as well. But I find that very interesting. It's not just in white Western culture. It's not just in other parts of the world. African Americans are waking up to it as well, and it seems to be like everyone is waking up to it, which I find a very interesting turn of events. I didn't think, considering Jewish involvement in civil rights, I didn't think they'd ever actually wake up to it. So I find that to be a very. You have any thoughts on that? On the idea, the African American community waking up to it?
I recently had the good fortune to meet with a representative of the Nation of Islam in Chicago. I was basically my good friend Jason Whitlock arranged this meeting, and I handed him the copy of the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and I asked him to pass it on to Minister Farrakhan. So at that point, he said he would, and then he told me I have a large following among the Nation of Islam, and that people listen to my podcast all the time. And I said, well, this is good, because all political movements are based on a common enemy. And I said, we have a common enemy, and this common enemy has tried to divide us along racial lines for a long time. This is not new. Okay, the Jews basically created the Harlem Renaissance to basically colonize Black people in this country and turn them into paradigms of sexual liberation. Jazz is an example of what I'm talking about. The poetry of Langston Hughes, the Spingarn brothers, and Amy Spingarn were heavily involved in colonizing Blacks culturally. The Spingarn brothers are also the people that created the NAACP, which was basically another attempt to colonize Black people by Jews. Marcus Garvey showed up at NAACP headquarters in New York and said, there are no Black people here. It's only Jewish lawyers. Okay, this is significant, because I think that the main thing that is used to divide Americans is race. You know, it used to be, white people were privileged and Black people were not. Now it's the opposite. Black people are privileged and white people are not. But the result is the same. You have people divided who should be united. And I think that what we're seeing now, especially with groups like the Nation of Islam, in spite of their reputation, is an openness to people who are willing to work together to remove Jewish influence from our culture. They have been courageous in speaking out against the Jews, and they deserve credit for that.
Absolutely. Okay, last question. This is a Catholic show. I'm a Catholic. You're a Catholic. Does the Catholic Church have anything to say regarding the Jewish question or anti-Semitism? And if so, how do you go about interpreting this, and what does it have to say about how we should treat Jewish people in particular?
Yeah, well, what you should have to distinguish here is what point of history. At what point of history are you talking about? So I would recommend to all of your viewers, go to culturewars.com and buy the series on the Jewish question, which was published in Civiltà Cattolica, the official magazine of the Catholic Church, in 1890. It's a 3-part series where the Catholic Church deals with the Jewish question. This is an important part of our history. It has gone into eclipse because of the failed experiment known as Catholic Jewish Dialogue, which took place after Vatican II. We need to get back to the default setting of the Catholic Church, which is the Jews are the people who have killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. Catholics, Jesus Christ told us to love our enemies. He didn't say pretend that you don't have any enemies, is what the church has been doing for over 60 years now. Love your enemies. And so we should all love the Jews, because they are not only our enemies, they are enemies of the entire human race. So read that article, those series of articles. It's
what are they called again?
It's Civiltà Cattolica on the Jewish question. If you go to fidelitypress.org or culturewars.com, it will pop up. It's not long. It's just three articles, and you will have a deeper understanding of the real position of the church on the Jews. This was written 100 years after the French Revolution. It was an assessment of the state of what state is France in now 100 years after the revolution. And they came to this stunning conclusion that basically any country that turns away from laws created by Catholic rulers will end up being ruled by Jews. It's a stunning analysis, and I think everyone should read it to get some sense of the real historical perspective that we need in dealing with this question now.
Absolutely. Well, I'll make sure everyone listening that's listed in the description so you can easily find it, and I will be probably reading that tonight. We're running up on our time. Any final thoughts or plugs? Where can people find you at? Any final thoughts on the Jewish question?
The articles magazine is called Culture Wars. You can find it at culturewars.com. All of the books I mentioned, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, The Holocaust narrative, all the books you need to understand what's going on are available at fidelitypress.org. Do not go to Google. You probably already know what the ADL is going to say about me, and that's all you'll find on Google. Go to fidelitypress.org or culturewars.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Oh, and if anyone listening, I also recommend Monsters from the Id. That is one I have read. That's a very good book. I recommend everyone check that one out as well. Well, Mr. Jones, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a very fun and fantastic episode. Again, just thank you for coming on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, everyone, that's another episode of Thomas Reviews. Like, comment, share, subscribe, whole 9 yards. I got Pete Quinones coming on next week, and Baz from Twitter coming on for a short history on the English Civil War. So you don't want to miss that. Yeah, everyone have a good night, and God bless.